Today we'll discuss the most important constitutional amendment in the history of Indian Constitution, and that is the 42nd Amendment Act of 1976. Under this amendment, we'll cover what was the historical context for the introduction of this amendment, what was the purpose of this amendment, what were the key changes made through this amendment, how this amendment impacted the governance of India, and what was the future course of this amendment. So let's first talk about the historical context of this amendment. So this amendment, 42nd Amendment, it was brought in by Indira Gandhi government during the period of emergency, which was for the period of 1975 to 1977. So this amendment was brought in with the intention of centralizing power, aligning the constitution with the ideology of the ruling government, and also to suppress the opposition. So there was this committee, the Swaran Singh committee, which was set up by the Indira Gandhi government, and this committee had given several recommendations. So to materialize the recommendations given by this committee, the 42nd Amendment Act of 1976 was brought in. So the purpose of this amendment was to strengthen the executive and weaken the judiciary and the legislature, to give greater importance to directive principles of state policy in governance, and also to define India's character as socialist and secular republic, and also to address issues like anti-national activities, governance challenges, and the balance of federal power. So what were the key changes introduced through this amendment? The first change was with regards to the preamble of the Indian Constitution. This amendment, that is the 42nd Amendment, it added terms like socialist, secular to define India's ideological orientation, and also it changed the term unity of the nation to unity and integrity of the nation. The second change was with regards to the fundamental duties. It introduced a new part, that is Part 4A, and Article 51A, with 10 fundamental duties for citizens. And the duties includes respecting the constitution, safeguarding public property, protecting the environment, etc. The third change was with regards to directive principles of state policy. And under this, it added 3 new articles. Article 39A talks about equal justice and free legal aid to the people of India. And Article 43A talks about participation of workers in industrial management, and Article 48A talks about protection of the environment, forests, and wildlife. So this amendment also ensured that if there is any law which the government is trying to implement, which is in line with the DPSPs, especially under Article 31C. Article 31 was a fundamental right back then, and it was right to property. So if there is any DPSP which is directing the state to bring in some legislation for property related matters, those matters cannot be questioned in any court, and courts have no power to declare such laws unconstitutional. The fourth change introduced through this amendment was regarding judiciary. So this amendment restricted the power of judicial review of courts, and also curtailed the power of Supreme Court and High Court to issue writs. So due to this amendment, now Supreme Court and High Court cannot issue writs for the protection of fundamental rights of the citizens. This amendment has also made constitutional amendments immune to judicial scrutiny by introducing Articles 368 Clause 4 and 368 Clause 5, which means that now judiciary has no power to investigate into the constitutionality of any amendment. 42nd Amendment also introduced the concept of tribunals, tribunals for administration and tribunals for other matters, and added a new part into the constitution, that is Part 14A. So now there are tribunals which can handle specialized cases by bypassing traditional courts. 42nd Amendment also introduced legislative and executive changes. This amendment increased the tenure of Lok Sabha and state assemblies from 5 to 6 years. This amendment made the president of the country bound by the advice of the Council of Ministers. Means now the president has no discretion while deciding any matter. He has to go with the advice of the Council of Ministers. This amendment also froze the number of seats in Lok Sabha and state assemblies based on the 1971 census until 2001. Means until 2001, the number of seats in Lok Sabha and state assemblies cannot be changed, and they have been fixed as per the census of 1971. And it was the 42nd Amendment which talked about that national emergency should not be necessarily for the whole country, rather, it can also be introduced for a part of the country. This amendment has also extended the time period of president's rule in a state from 6 months to 1 year. The sixth change was regarding federal structure. Now the union government has the power to deploy armed forces in a state for maintaining law and order. This amendment has also shifted 5 subjects from state list to concurrent list, and those were education, forest, protection of wild animals and birds, administration of justice, excluding high courts and Supreme Court, and also weights and measures. So there were some miscellaneous changes also which were brought in through this amendment. Like this amendment abolished the requirement of quorum in parliament. Quorum is nothing but the minimum number of members required to be present in the house. So this amendment abolished that requirement also. This amendment allowed parliament to define the privileges of its members and committees. Also provided for the creation of an all India judicial service. This amendment shortened the procedure for disciplining civil servants by removing the second stage or representation. So this basically means that if there is a civil servant who has been accused of any malpractices and there is an inquiry which is going on, so he had 2 opportunities to defend himself. One, during the inquiry phase, and the other, the second opportunity, was when the inquiry report is being submitted by the inquiring authorities. So he had 2 opportunities to defend himself: during the inquiry and after inquiry, once the report has been submitted. So this second stage, when the report has been finalized and submitted, now he has no right to defend himself. He can defend himself during the inquiry phase, not after that. So this second stage representation clause has been removed by this amendment. So what was the impact of this amendment? This amendment was responsible for centralization of power. This amendment also weakened the judicial independence by limiting the judiciary's ability to review legislative and executive actions. This amendment has also strengthened DPSPs by prioritizing the welfare over individual rights. What was the reaction of the people? So people saw this move as authoritarian and anti-democratic, and they criticized this move by protesting. People also labeled this amendment as mini constitution due to the extensive changes made through this amendment. So what was the future course of this amendment? So there were several provisions which have been repealed when the Indira Gandhi government toppled. So there was this 43rd Amendment Act and 44th Amendment Act which restored several powers of judiciary and reversed changes like the extension of legislative terms. Means now the term of Lok Sabha or state assemblies would remain as usual, like 5 years, not 6 years. But there were several provisions which have been retained, and those were fundamental duties, changes to the preamble, and also changes to DPSPs. So this is it for today, and I hope the discussion was very much clear.